It was 11:58 p.m. on December 31st. The city pulsed with life, fireworks cracking overhead, neighbors shouting countdowns from rooftops in Brooklyn, champagne corks popping like distant gunfire. Inside my quiet apartment, the only sound was the low hum of my laptop fans and the soft clink of a spoon against cold coffee. I sat alone, eyes fixed on the dual monitors that had been my world for years. The email arrived with a single, polite ping. Subject: Performance Termination Notice. 2 short sentences. A digital signature from an HR rep I'd never met, and an attachment I didn't bother opening right away. They had timed it perfectly, late enough that most people would be drunk, celebrating, or asleep, assuming no one would notice until the new year began. But I was wide awake, watching the Ridgeway Capital backend execute its final bonus allocation run of the fiscal year. I didn't flinch. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow breath, and refreshed the internal dashboard. At 12:01 a.m., the Q4 bonus engine published live to the investor portal. That's when my name, Elena Voss, appeared under unpaid liabilities. A glowing red line item, $4.2 million. To understand how a simple termination email could birth a 7-figure liability overnight, you have to go back. For nearly 3 years, I had lived inside the machine at Ridgeway Capital, a mid-sized hedge fund in Manhattan known for aggressive automation. I was the one who rebuilt their fractured bonus disbursement system after 2 previous vendors failed spectacularly. The old setup caused compliance violations, mismatched tax buckets, and investor complaints that nearly cost the firm its reputation. They brought me in on an emergency contract. I worked nights and weekends, turning chaos into precision. I wrote modular logic for bonus waterfalls, compliance flags, hedge fee projections, and real-time audit trails. Everything ran clean, fast, and bulletproof. Executives took credit in town halls, boasting about synergy and efficiency. I stayed invisible, head down. No LinkedIn posts, no wine club invites. I liked it that way. The code was mine, embedded deep with proprietary signatures. That made me dangerous. Marcus Hale arrived in July like a storm no one saw coming. He was the new head of process optimization, Harvard MBA. 3-piece suits that changed daily, endless buzzwords, and a habit of interrupting meetings to cite case studies he half understood. He called long-tenured staff legacy dead weight and over-engineered relics. From the back of the room, I watched him like you'd watch someone juggling knives near a live wire. Something was going to break. Marcus wanted control. He pushed for streamlining, manual overrides, simplified macros, faster projections. He didn't understand why my systems had multiple verification layers. We're too slow, too scared, he told the CFO. What he really wanted was to bypass safeguards so bonuses could be visualized earlier, pleasing the board. By early December, override requests began appearing in the pipeline. Sloppy ones. I traced them to a temporary folder containing an Excel macro called Q4 Bonus Accelerator Final V3 XLSM. It bypassed 3 of my gate systems and rerouted logic directly to payout endpoints. I flagged it internally. No response. Then Marcus appeared at my cubicle one afternoon, 2 wide-eyed interns in tow, cologne thick with entitlement. You're slowing the payout queue. Elena, he said, smirking as if I were a clogged pipe. We're streamlining for the board. I looked at the macro on my sandbox screen. It was duct tape over an engine, no checksums, no authentication handshakes, no duplicate resolution. It directly touched a proprietary endpoint I had license-bound years earlier. Who approved this? I asked quietly. We don't need approval to move faster, Marcus replied. He never realized the endpoint was keyed to my personal dev clause. approved by the board during the original crisis. He didn't know about the quiet amendment I had insisted on. Any post-termination execution of my proprietary logic without mutual written release would trigger reclassification of downstream financial flows as unpaid license utilization. Section 14B. Buried. Dormant. Legally binding. Over the following weeks, the overrides multiplied. New macro versions proliferated. Each execution was logged privately, unauthorized access, skipped validations, pre-fiscal triggers. I kept my own shadow ledger. Not out of anger, but documentation. I knew where this was heading. They didn't. The access requests suddenly stopped. Marcus vanished from my floor. The system went eerily quiet. That's when I knew they were preparing to cut me loose. I opened the console, typed one line, and initialized the license audit status to dormant. Trigger ready for post-termination execution without clearance. I waited. The days leading to New Year's Eve felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I kept working as normal, fixing minor issues, answering routine questions, pretending nothing was wrong. Inside, every ignored flag and bypassed safeguard built pressure. Marcus had convinced leadership that my modules were passive infrastructure, replaceable. He didn't grasp that the entire bonus engine, tax harmonization, vesting projections, investor portal mirroring still relied on my core logic. Every executive salary adjustment, every compliance report, every investor smile traced back to code I authored and retained rights over. On December 30th, the final override attempt came through. Another macro variant. I watched it scrape my payout tree without proper handshake. The backend logged it silently. Unauthorized pre-fiscal trigger detected. Still no external alarm. That was intentional. I had designed the system to handle anomalies gracefully until the exact wrong conditions were met. That night, I reviewed the original retention agreement from 3 years earlier. Back then, Ridgeway was desperate after their old bonus system collapsed, causing a 3.19% reconciliation error right before filing. They needed me fast. I delivered a working prototype in days and a firewall around the IP. In exchange, the board signed off on terms including Section 14B in the event of termination. Any subsequent execution of proprietary algorithmic logic without prior written mutual clearance shall constitute unpaid license utilization, and all resultant financial flows shall be reclassified as outstanding IP dues payable to the original author. Clean. Quiet. Binding. Marcus had never read it. He read summaries and bullet points. Legal probably skimmed it during onboarding. No one revised it when he arrived. New Year's Eve arrived. 11:58 p.m. The termination email hit. I let it sit unopened for 3 full minutes, staring at the timestamp, the cowardice of firing someone at the last second of the fiscal year. Then I logged in. The bonus allocation report published live at 12:01 a.m. Clean numbers. Proud projections. Except for the new entry halfway down the ledger. Unpaid liabilities, Elena Voss, $4.2 million reason. Unauthorized post-termination execution. Section 14B deferred trigger. The trap closed. The clause wasn't dramatic code you could delete. It was a legal function nested inside the logic flow. When the macro ran seconds after my termination became official, the system recognized it as misuse of licensed IP by a now non-existent user. It rerouted every downstream dollar as contingent on unresolved licensing. Escrow buffers froze. Transactional ledgers entered audit state. Investor dashboards updated in real time, showing the provisional liability tied directly to me. I took one screenshot from my records and closed the laptop. The architecture had spoken. The next morning, January 1st, the first finance ticket dropped at 7:12 a.m. Bonus queue stalled. Manual override requested. At 7:14 a.m., Tax escrow misalignment. Q4 totals off by 11.6%. At 7:21 a.m. Compliance flag. Logic deviation. Potential unauthorized disbursement. They thought it was a glitch from year-end rollover or version mismatch. It wasn't broken. It was defending itself. By 8 a.m., the automation console lit up. Dozens of transactions sat in recursive approval loops, no matching license key because the keyholder no longer existed in the system. Marcus reportedly told everyone to just run it again. Each rerun deepened the classification. By the third attempt, pattern violation triggered structured disclosure escalation. Compliance called it by 9:15 a.m. Legal ran queries by 9:30 a.m. At 10 a.m., a junior associate found the phrase in the deployment repo, Section 14B deferred trigger penalty active, value $4.2 million, source, Elena Voss, status, asset unpaid license execution post-termination. Not a bug. A bill. I went for a long walk in the cold January air. Quiet streets. Winter sun on the buildings. Meanwhile, inside Ridgeway, the Simple Clause had locked their bonus pipeline and turned a former employee into a seven-figure liability grenade on their balance sheet. The panic built slowly at first, then exploded. Internal calls multiplied. Slack channels filled with frantic messages. The CEO blamed Marcus. Marcus blamed legal. Everyone searched for someone with authority to reverse the trigger. They couldn't. It wasn't a software toggle. It was the consequence of a contract they had ignored, tied to logic they never fully owned, executed on a system whose upstream belonged to me. My phone began buzzing around 9:13 a.m. Marcus first, then the CEO, then legal, then HR. I let every call roll to voicemail. I didn't need conversation. My counsel had already sent a single-page memo to the board. Active use of license logic. Undisclosed continuity risk. Please confirm termination of all residual proprietary modules or authorize delayed license settlement per Section 14B. Absent confirmation by January 14th. Each execution event will accrue additional penalty per subsection B. 14 modules still active. Finance logic. Tax harmonization. Bonus allocation. Deferred equity projections. Compliance mirroring. All tied to my license tokens. The board received the memo. Some recognized the structure from a past risk workshop. Others hadn't heard of it. Marcus reportedly dismissed it as bluffing and legal ease. Accounting didn't agree. Not when external auditors Sullivan and Gate updated their summary to include pending logic verification and 14 modules classified as non-cleared third-party IP. Not when the investor ledger showed my name on a flagged balance line. Not when an institutional shareholder sent a direct inquiry. Why does one individual control $4.2 million in undistributed asset items? It stopped being a systems issue. It became shareholder risk. I stayed calm. This wasn't vengeance or a LinkedIn rant. This was balance sheet justice. Numbers.
Contracts.
Triggers.
Math.
They had built an empire on automation and forgotten who wrote the blueprint. Now the blueprint had turned the engine into an instrument of accountability. They couldn't erase my name. The system didn't recognize Ridgeway as full owner. They could try killing everything I built and rewriting from scratch in under 7 days, an impossible timeline, or settle the license as the contract required. Either way, they finally had to speak the only language that mattered to them: money. January 9th. 4 business days into the chaos. The audit committee convened in person, flesh, sweat, bad coffee, no filters. Everyone remembered how fragile reputation truly was. The compliance director stood, hands trembling, and read the summary. Due to the late-night termination of Elena Voss, Section 14B and her retention agreement activated upon unauthorized post-employment execution of proprietary logic. The macro was interpreted as license misuse. Result: $4.2 million accrued asset value logged under her name and reported downstream. Unless resolved by January 14th, we will be required to restate Q4 earnings due to unresolved liability and unverified IP clearance. Silence felt like a roof collapsing slowly. The chairman, face carved from experience and regret, asked flatly, "Who approved her termination?" Everyone looked at Marcus. He adjusted his jacket. It was a strategic decision. She hadn't filed a quarterly optimization report since Q2. We assumed her modules were passive. "Did you sign off?" the chairman interrupted. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." The chairman stared at him for a long moment. "Then you signed a liability." Marcus's face drained of color. The audit committee chair wrote a single word on a legal pad, underlined it twice, and passed it to general counsel.
No one needed to ask.
It said, "You're done." HR shrank. Legal whispered. The CTO stared at his laptop helplessly. The structure had collapsed. The only escape door read license settlement. An external counsel slid a new memo across the table: license resolution path, Apex Forge clause execution. Template attached. Settle. Acknowledge license use. Pay $4.2 million in full for permanent clearance. Or reject and refile Q4 under material misstatement. Both expensive. One catastrophic. No one argued. That same day, people who once called me non-essential signed off on a payout they hadn't budgeted for, covering a risk they never saw coming, triggered by a clause they never respected. I never lifted a finger. The architecture did the work. January 20th. Market closed. Investor eyes moved on. Ridgeway filed a quiet amendment to their year-end disclosures, a sterile footnote on page 32 of the updated 10K, license settlement. For $1,200,000 finalized. Recipient Apex Forge Solutions. Classification: outstanding IP dues resolved. They didn't list my name directly. They didn't have to. The system had already done it publicly. They paid not as severance or damages, but because they had no legal alternative. Section 14B flipped the switch on their most sensitive financial instrument and kept it lit until settled. No negotiations. No discounts. The contract spoke. The ledger enforced it. The architecture chose me. That week, Ridgeway's backend quietly shifted. Engineers rolled out replacement logic under a temporary build. My original deployment keys went dark, decommissioned, deprecated,
Archived.
Apex Forge Solutions went live the same week. Not flashy. No viral launch. Just a clean, modern platform rebuilt from the bones of what I once gave them, now independent, streamlined, transparent, and wholly mine. At the bottom of every page, in muted gray text, built by the woman they fired. I made no statement. No interviews. Some victories don't come with applause. They land like a ledger closing, like a balance finally reconciled. They tried to erase me with an email. Instead, they wrote me into their books forever. The quiet power of a well-written contract. The danger of underestimating the person who built the machine that runs your empire. The cost of arrogance in a world where code outlives people. These lessons lingered. What would you have done if the system you trusted suddenly turned and demanded payment from the very hands that dismissed its creator?